Okay, so next big assignment coming up, SA2, right? So SA2 is due a week from today. Everyone has prompts. You can also find them online on Brightspace. Okay, so remember SA1, you all have a chance, and you still do, right? You can submit a revised version if you want to attempt to raise your essay grade. But the option isn't or won't be available for SA2, right? So SA2, when the final draft is turned in next Wednesday or whenever, right? That's the final draft. So again, take advantage of me as a resource if I can be helpful. So I'm happy to read drafts in advance. So the deadline for me reading a full draft is Saturday. You can just email it to me and I'll send you back comments. But even later than Saturday, I'm happy to, again, help you get started, help you find sources, go over an outline, anything like that. So if I can be helpful in any way, please reach out, okay? Also remember, right, if you still have free late days remaining, if you didn't use them all up with SA1, you can use those for SA2, right? And turn in SA2, 1, 2, 3, whatever days late without grade penalty. Okay, any questions there? No, okay. All right, so our main source we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at Livy today, talking about the Second Punic War, which is PS 22. I'm also going to return to Polybius for a second because I want to at least mention his take on Athens, which we didn't get to last time. Let's see. All right. Okay, everyone's here. Good. Okay, so before we get to Roman imperialism, right, we were talking about the Roman Republic, and we ended talking about Polybius, right, and his take on the Roman Constitution, right? Remember, Constitution just means government. The Roman government, right, their word for government, res publica, right? So again, they just called their government the government, right? But we were looking at his take on the Roman Constitution, on the Roman government, and again, as part of his argument for why Rome comes to kind of dominate the world, right? How its constitution kind of contributed to Rome's rise. So, what kind of constitution did Rome have, according to Polybius?
It's a mixed.
It was mixed, he said. It was a mix of kind of the three good types of governments. What are the three good types of government? Kingship. All right.
Then there was the aristocrats.
Right, the aristocrats or aristocracy.
And then there was the
We'll go to Brian heard it. Democracy, right? So again, it's a mixture of all three, right? And he says this is good because one of the things it does is it keeps it from kind of, sliding down that kind of inevitable cycle, right? And Rome can stay strong for a longer period of time. All right. So just as a comparison, right, as part of the reading, which we didn't get to, he talks about Athens. So I will read part of this just to jog memories, I guess, right? So he says, for though it perhaps had more frequent interludes of excellence, this is the Athenian government, yet its highest perfection was attained during the brilliant career of Themistocles. All right, we know Themistocles, right? When was Themistocles kind of leading the Athenian state? What point? Abdul? Persian Wars, right? Okay. So he says this was the high point. But having reached that point, it quickly declined, owing to its essential instability. For the Athenian demos, the people, is always in a position of a ship without a commander. In such a ship, if fear of the enemy or the occurrence of a storm induce the crew to be of one mind and obey the helmsman, then everything goes well. What's that?
It goes well.
It goes well. Why does it go well?
Because they have somebody to lead them.
No, they don't have anyone to lead them. He's saying that, sort of. It's not that the helmsman is leading them, But what makes them follow the helmsman? What motivates them?
They all have, there's like a big collective danger that's kind of coming for them.
Right. So it's kind of, he says, there's a fear of the enemy or fear of a storm, right? They don't have a captain, so there's no one commanding them, but they're all going to kind of do what the helmsman says, or kind of, kind of sail the ship correctly because they're motivated by fear, right?
I just was gonna say, it's a similar, in regards to the fact that the helmsman is the only one that is capable of actually, driving the ship.
Right. That's the idea, right? So again, they're gonna follow him and listen to him. But if they recover from the fear and begin to treat their officers with contempt and to quarrel with each other because they are no longer of one mind, one party wishing to continue the voyage, the other urging the steersman to bring the ship to anchor, some letting out the sheets, the sails, others hauling them in and ordering the sails to be furled, their discord and quarrels make a sorry show to lookers on. And the position of affairs is full of risk to those on board engaged on the same voyage. And the result has often been said that after escaping the dangers of the widest seas and the most violent storms, they wreck their ship in harbor and close to shore. And this is what often happened to the Athenian constitution. So what's he think of the Athenian government, right? The Athenian constitution, the democracy. What do you think, Abdul?
That in times of like war, democracy is good, but like when everything's calm, it's not ideal. Like it's vulnerable.
And why is it? So democracy's got good potential, right? Democracy can rise to the challenge if everyone's focused on, kind of the same goal, right? But he's like, what happens if you don't have that challenge, right?
Well, as we already been told, there's chaos, there's danger.
Why? You go, Nicolette, why?
Mob rule,
Well, so what's mob rule? Yes, but what is mob rule?
like when there's too many riots, because
Okay.
Well, there's too many voices.
It'll get there. There's kind of one step before, like what leads to the riots? Like what's kind of the defining characteristic of mob rule? How about Abdul?
They all they're going against each other because they're not all of like one mind.
So if they're not all of one mind, what's motivating them?
They can't agree on it.
Right. So what's motivating them then? You think?
Different ambitions.
Yeah. Okay. But what's it's kind of implied here. Like what's if I'm not of one mind and I'm not following the helmsman, who am I following?
Yourself?
Yeah, right. I'm just kind of so the mob rule, the definition of mob rule, what sets it apart from democracy is just people doing whatever they want, right? As opposed to doing what they need to do or what is right or what is good for the good of the state. So that's kind of what he's describing here on the ship, right? He's just like people are just all of a sudden, going to start doing whatever they want. Some says, "Hey, let's go further." Others say, "Hey, let's dock." Some say more speed. Others say slow down. Whatever they feel like, right? And he's like, and in the end, right, the ship can survive all of these dangers, and right about when it's kind of ready to pull into port, it's going to fall apart, right? Because the people stop kind of working together. Okay, so again, what's the problem? What does Athens lack then? Given that you can't rely on ever-present danger 100% of the time. What does Athens need? Jordan?
Like a central authority figure.
There you go, right? And again, it needs that kind of king/aristocracy, right, to direct the people. Okay? So too democratic. Okay, last question. This segues in today, I get a little bit more. Who are the Carthaginians? Anthony?
Weren't they a community of Phoenicians?
They were, right? So Carthage begins as a Phoenician colony that wins independence, right? So we kind of start talking about the Carthaginians as kind of being their own people, their own culture, right?
I feel like at its time, I think Carthage was like Rome's biggest rival.
Absolutely, Rome's biggest rival. And in fact, Carthage also has a mixed constitution. Polybius also discusses Carthage's mixed constitution, and like Rome, right, Again, it's a superior form of government. There's elements of kingship, of aristocracy, and democracy.
Don't forget aristocracy.
What's that?
Don't forget aristocracy.
Don't be an
No,
aristocracy.
don't forget aristocracy.
Yeah, don't forget aristocracy. But I will give away the ending here, right? What makes Rome superior? Polybius says, adding to his theory, he's like, well, even in a mixed constitution, right? You've got these three parts and it kind of keeps things static. There's still some fluctuation, right? And he's like, even as kind of time passes, it moves more and more democratic, or the democratic part of the mixed constitution gets a little bit more and more power. And Polybius says, that's not necessarily a good thing. So what makes Rome superior, Polybius argues, is that Carthage was superior first. And Carthage was superior when its aristocracy was kind of the dominant third. But over time, Carthage has slipped because the democratic element of their constitution started to become more powerful. So still mixed, but again, the democratic third, the assembly, has a little bit more power. He's like, Rome was superior, and Rome's going to beat Carthage because Rome is kind of a little bit later to the game. It becomes powerful a little bit later, and at the time of the conflict, Rome's aristocracy, and what's the aristocracy in Rome, in the Roman Constitution?
The Senate?
The Senate, right, is the strongest third of the government. So he's like, that's what makes it superior, right, is that for Rome, when they're conflicting each other, the aristocratic element was the strongest. Carthage, it was the democratic element. And that was just due to the passage of time, that Carthage had been established in a mixed constitution and powerful for a longer period of time than Rome. So Polybius is very big on this idea of kind of natural decay and natural cycle, right? That somehow governments are going to kind of trend in a certain direction. Is your question?
Yeah, weren't they also Libyan?
And right, well, okay, so sort of. So they're going to have some territory in Libya, near Libya, and there's going to be a mixture of Phoenician settlers and indigenous peoples. However, there's also some other peoples who modern historians call Libyan who are separate from Carthage. So, a complicated answer. Jordan?
Who had the right to vote in the Carthaginian system?
We don't know as much about it, right? Because we don't have the sources that survive. But again, it seems like Rome, that adult male citizens, right? But again, not quite sure how the votes are weighted, right? Because one of the things we know from Rome is that all the votes aren't equal. And why aren't the votes equal in Rome?
And then, what's it called? Century.
The centuries, right? It was 1 century, 1 vote. And there, the centuries had different mixtures of people. Okay, so Roman citizenship, right? You got Roman citizenship generally through birth. Okay? It can also be given through a grant by the assembly, right? So much like Athens, basically they can pass a law making people citizens. This will start to become more common in Rome over time. So initially it's a little less common maybe, but it starts to become more common. As citizens, right, you can participate in politics if you're male, right? With kind of the caveats that in order to hold office, right, you need to have X amount of money. And as we just mentioned, right, your wealth determines your voting power. Okay, so, Anthony, your question?
Couldn't you also get it through military?
Later, yes. So yes, eventually. All right, so again, Roman politics, right, and Roman society is going to be dominated by, again, this elite, and it is very much a wealth-based elite, kind of under the veneer of, kind of patrician, plebeian family, kind of things, right? But it's really a wealth-based elite. Your goal, if you're a member of this elite, right? So what you're trying to do is you want to hold office, and you want to win military victories. Because if you are an elite Roman, this is what is going to bring you the most prestige, right? The Roman word, dignitas, from which we get dignity, right? Means a little different, something different to the Romans, right? It's like honor, status, worth. So we describe Roman culture, or at least elite culture, as a competition for dignitas. You want to show that you are better than that guy over there. The way you do it, up here. Okay? So we've got this hierarchical government and society that favors the wealthy. Coming out of that is going to again be an important kind of informal type of relationship that is going to be a big part of Roman society and politics, patronage. So we use the term patronage to describe some sort of relationship between two Roman citizens of unequal status, right? So people who are at two different social levels. And basically, patronage consists of doing favors for one another. Okay, who is familiar with the movie The Godfather? All right, everyone's familiar with it. All right, wow. So, on the day when the Godfather's, whatever, daughter's getting baptized or getting married, what do people come and do? Or why do people come and see The Godfather? What do they want?
Patronage?
They want it, well, what's his patronage?
Favors.
They want favors, like what?
Money.
Money? Part in a movie? I want my rival to get beat up?
Privacy at the table.
Right? Yeah, want to see the table maybe, right? And what does the Godfather ask in exchange? Remembers their Godfather movie, or at least...
Loyalty.
Kind of, yeah, I mean, yes, loyalty. But how does he phrase it? I know I'm asking something really obscure, but we're the cinephiles, right? It's like, one day I'm going to come to you, and what am I going to ask? A favor from you. So I will do this for you, and then one day in the future I will come and I will ask you for something. And you will again perform this. And what happens if you do not perform this favor? Well, it's implied, yeah, bad things are going to happen, right? So again, similar type of relationship here, right? Where lower status Romans will seek out people of higher status, seeking a favor, right? Seeking financial support, seeking political support, whatever, right? They want to get a military contract to supply grain to the army, you name it, right? And in exchange for which you're supposed to do something for the elite Roman. One of the preeminent ways where a lower status individual did a favor for a highest status individual was something called the salutatio. Basically what you were supposed to do. So I'm a lower status Roman, that guy over there, Quintus, he did a favor for me, so now I owe him something as part of this patronage relationship. So I am supposed to perform the salutatio, which basically means I'm supposed to show up at his house first thing in the morning. And I'm supposed to hang around outside of his house. Okay? How is that doing him a favor? Right?
Question.
Yes.
Would this have been a public gesture or would it have been more underhanded,
Both.
depending on?
What you were asking, I guess. But not necessarily, this wasn't necessarily illegal or shady. Right? There could be a shady form of it, maybe like that, but this was kind of considered just the way the world worked. Okay, so what does the elite Roman get out of me showing up and hanging out outside of his house?
Just having something done around the house.
But he's an elite Roman. He's got staff to handle that. Yeah, good idea. And in fact, I'm not really supposed to be doing anything.
Shows that people owe you favors.
It shows that people owe you favors. And what does that give you?
Power.
Power, influence, status. Look at all these people who are hanging around my house doing nothing first thing in the morning, right? This shows how powerful I am. And then if you go out in your day-to-day business, they're supposed to kind of act as an entourage for you.
Like you got a posse.
Yeah. They're just basically supposed to follow you around, right? Again, not necessarily doing anything, but highlighting to everyone else just how important you are.
Could you theoretically launch a political career if you just racked up a bunch of favors? And they would the rich people would be inclined to help you in
Right.
politics.
So again, so long as you can meet the wealth requirements. So part of your favors are, hey, give me money so I can run for office. Again, that person might see a benefit. And in fact, in the Republic later on, we'll see, or we're not going to look at it, but there are examples of, yeah, I think this guy would be a really good kind of politician to have working for me. I'm going to support him financially and politically so he can get elected. And again, nothing shady about that, right? It's only bad if it's like, well, you're helping someone who doesn't deserve it or the wrong type of person. Make sense? Okay, good? All right. So let's talk let's talk imperialism. Imperialism, otherwise known as empire building. So today we are going to be talking about a Roman Empire. What I mean by this is that we're not going to be at the Roman Empire where there's an emperor. But the Roman Republic is going to conquer its own empire, where it rules over a wide, diverse geographical region. So this is what we mean here about building a Roman Empire, right? So no emperor, not the kind of empire with a capital E, but again, Rome will control an empire. Okay? All right, so military expansion in Italy, right? Soon after the establishment of the Roman Republic, Rome goes to war. They fight a series of wars with the peoples who are kind of the closest around them, known as the Latins, right? Rome is going to win, and they are going to establish as a result of these wars that the Roman people and the Latin people will be in permanent alliance with one another forever and ever. Okay. The Etruscans have been making noise for a while, right? Last class we looked at the story of Horatius Cocles, right? He is actually defending Rome from the Etruscans, right? Rome was going to go north a few decades later and basically annex all of this Etruscan land. Okay. A little bit later, Rome's going to fight against its kind of biggest Italian rival from central Italy here, the Samnites. They will fight 3 wars with the Samnites, coming close to losing several times, right? Because the Samnites are kind of Rome's equal. But Rome's going to win. They're going to be master now of all of kind of central Italy here. During these Samnite wars, these permanent Latin allies, right, who are kind of forced into the position, are going to use the opportunity to rebel, but they're not going to be successful, and they are going to be absorbed by Rome. Basically, they will become part of Rome as opposed to independent allied entities. Throughout this Latin land, Rome establishes colonies. Even though it's not really far away. We tend to think of colonies as being far off away, right? This is nearby, but they call them colonies. That's where we get our English name from, of ex-soldiers and, again, the poorer Roman peasants. They basically set them up with land in a city, or a new town, and say, okay, new Roman town. All right.
Were these lands that the Greeks colonized? Or?
Not as much. There's a little bit of Greeks. Most of the Greeks are down here further to the south.
Okay.
So this is Latin, Etruscan, and kind of other Italic people. Little bit of Greek presence, but not a huge lot of, closest you're probably going to get is like Neapolis or Naples, which is down a little bit.
Don't they like eventually conquer like the Celts also?
Eventually, we'll get there, yes. Coming up. Jordan.
Are the Romans just lucky, or are they like actually better equipped to beat these people?
That's a hard question to answer, right? I don't have a good answer for you. Like, I know that they are definitely with the Samnites, right? They are pretty equivalent, right? So part of this issue, right, is this is the era where we don't have contemporary sources, right? So we know that there were kind of sources exist, but we get people from like 200 years later who had read those earlier sources, right? So we're not quite sure. But from what it seems is that the Samnites, at the very least, were pretty equally matched with Rome. Like, this seemed like it could go either way, which is why they're fighting, right? So why does Rome win? Is it luck? Is it having a couple good generals? Hard to say, right? But it wasn't like a runaway, like, foregone conclusion that Rome was going to win. All right. So again, citizen colonies popping up throughout central Italy, right? A way for Rome to kind of manage and control its growing territory. Okay, other questions here? No? All right. So, Roman citizens, right? So we talked about on the last slide. So Roman citizens possessed what we call full civil and legal rights. Civil rights, right? Contract marriage, right? So meaning that they were that they could form a marriage that would be protected under the law. Okay. Really, why marriage is important here, and why you want legal protection for your marriage, it's not about cohabitation. It's really about property. Like all of this has to do with property, right? So if you're a Roman citizen, you can form a partnership, a marriage with another person, right? There's going to be economic implications, and Roman law will kind of protect your interests if you're a Roman citizen. Make sense? Same thing is that you get the right to commercial transactions, buying and selling. Right? Now again, anyone can buy and sell. What this right means, though, is that your transactions are kind of protected by or covered by Roman law. That if I, sell something to someone and he doesn't pay me, I can take him to court under a Roman authority, right? So citizenship gives me access to these legal protections. Make sense? So it's not really the act of marriage or the act of buying and selling that Roman citizenship gives you, it's the protection or the right to law that you need if something goes wrong. Okay. Roman citizens have an obligation, although it's becoming increasingly theoretical, to serve in the army. I'll explain why in a second. And there's financial benefits to being a Roman citizen. By the 2nd century BCE, pretty much you don't have to pay taxes anymore because so much money is coming in from other sources. Okay? So your basic kind of package of rights for a Roman citizen. Plus, if you're a man, right, the voting and participating in politics. Now, Rome institutes another kind of level of citizenship. They call this Latin citizenship. So remember, the nearby Latins had been absorbed into Rome, right? That they lost their independence after the rebellion, they become part of Rome. But they are not granted full Roman citizenship. They get Latin citizenship, kind of one level down. Abdul.
Didn't the Romans speak Latin?
They did. The Romans were a Latin people. But this is kind of a Roman-centric view, right? So they're the Romans, everyone else is the Latins. But again, it's their kind of closest neighbors, both geographically and ethnically. All right, so if you have this Latin citizenship, right? You had to pay taxes, none of that. You had to serve in the army, no theoretical about it. No voting and participation in Roman politics. You still got these civil rights, though, right? So those were the people closest to Rome. Then, all of the other people who were under Roman control, right? So remember, Rome was now taking over central Italy. They are allies, or allies, meaning that they don't really have a say in the matter, right? They can't, much like the Delian League and the Athenians, they can't leave. Right? Allies have to serve in the army, have to pay taxes. They don't get the right to vote, like them, and they don't get access to Roman law. So that means they can buy and sell, but if there's a difficulty, right, they can't take their opponent to court under Roman law. Again, having that kind of access to law is a big deal, right? It means a lot. So to not have it really puts you at a disadvantage, especially if you are going to be competing with or interacting with Roman citizens.
So would they have to answer to like the local governor of the
There's
region?
no governors yet, right? So you've got the Roman government, and you might have your own local kind of town government, right? So you would have, town law, either written or customary, right? But it's a lot harder to enforce that, right? Because you don't really have a powerful state behind it. Versus if I want to take you to court under Roman law, there's some more weight behind it.
The governorship comes later.
Later.
Yeah.
A little bit later, actually, we're almost there with the governorship. So at this point, you've just got the city of Rome essentially controlling this central territory out of the city of Rome. So allies, right? Again, so these would be all people like here, whatever, right? So they're under Roman authority. They have their own kind of municipal council, right? But other than that, they have to follow the authority of the Roman Republic, despite getting none of the benefits. Which will be a recipe for disaster. Okay, does that make sense? Everyone with me there? So this is a little bit of abstract, right? But this is, kind of the legal history, right? Is that they are not getting kind of legal protections that other people have. And that's going to be problematic. Sure.
Did the Romans have like a concept similar to Pan-Hellenism in a way that they viewed themselves as better soldiers and peoples like the Latins?
Yes. Yeah, I would say. When we see it more, it's kind of extended more broadly to kind of Italians in general. It's kind of a fluid thing, right? So by the time we see it in the sources, it's more like, oh, Italians are better than Greeks. So it's like Romans, Latins, others are kind of viewed through the same lens. But certainly there is this idea of kind of a Roman superiority that's there. I guess a pan-Italicism. Okay. All right. So, this brings us to a fellow by the name of Pyrrhus of Epirus. So, Epirus is over here in Greece. It is right next to the bigger, more powerful kingdom of Macedonia. We've heard of Macedonia, right? Yes, we have, right? Okay, so Epirus had existed. It was pretty much under Macedonia's shadow, right? Technically independent, but Macedonia really kind of called the shots in a lot of ways. Okay? So, Rome has been expanding over here in Italy through through kind of central Italy, over here, right? Rome's been expanding, conquering all of this territory. Down in the southern part of Italy, this area is predominantly Greek, right? So Greek colonists, over the last, say 5 centuries or so, right, have been setting up city-states, polises, in southern Italy, right? So again, there's going to be other Italian peoples here too, but again, there's a really, really heavy, powerful Greek presence. And they get very, very nervous with this Roman expansion, right? They're like, uh-oh, this is bad. So they start appealing to their fellow Greeks for help or for assistance. Okay, so if we look at this time period, right? So a little before 281, let's say in the 280s, who remembers what's happening in Greece and really in the wider world, like in the 280s? Who remembers? What era are we dealing with?
Alexander.
A little bit. So Alexander's going to die in 323. Briar?
And then there's gonna be mass division among his former territories that will be distributed amongst his generals.
Right. So we get the kind of division among his generals. Generals kind of eventually kind of declare themselves kings, and that's happening, kind of like 287, 286, right? And the conflict is still going on. So at the time when, right, they're appealing to Greece, right, this is when all of these kind of Macedonian kingdoms, right, and there's the 3 big ones, Macedonia, Egypt, I guess Syria and Asia, right, Ptolemies, Antigonids, Seleucids, right, that's when all of this is going on, right? So they appeal to the Greeks, they're like, we need help from the Romans. Most of the Greeks aren't really interested, though, they're looking to their own business here. So Epirus at the time is ruled by this fellow of Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus is actually related to Alexander the Great. He's actually Alexander the Great's second cousin. So Alexander the Great's mom, Olympias, was actually from Epirus. She was part of the Epirate royal family, marries the Macedonian king, Philip II, you get Alexander, right? So her cousin is Pyrrhus's father. Yeah.
Doesn't he eventually become king of Macedonia at some point? I thought.
Not to my knowledge. You got me thinking here of something, if he does, it would be a blip. I don't think
They
so.
coined the term after him also.
They do. Well, they coined a term after him. Pyrrhic victory. We'll get there, in a second, right? So, Pyrrhus has ambitions, right? Alexander died 40 years ago, right? Pyrrhus was born soon after Alexander died, right? Everyone's talking about Alexander and his legacy. Pyrrhus wants to make his own mark on the world, right? He wants to be his own Alexander. All this stuff is going on over here in the east. Pyrrhus says, well, maybe looking westwards is a way for me to kind of, build my own empire, right? Build my own kingdom. So, 280, Pyrrhus responds to the call, comes to Italy. And initially is going to win big victories over the Romans. But, right, he takes very, very heavy losses. So even though he wins the battle, he doesn't have enough kind of strength, and again, it's harder to get reinforcements, right, to kind of close out Rome and win the war. So this is where we get the term, as people were kind of saying, Pyrrhic victory, right? If you hear today a Pyrrhic victory, it's kind of like you win but you lose, right? Or you win but kind of the cost is too high. That's referring to this. So Pyrrhus makes a good effort of it, right? I mean, you can see here, this is all of his campaigns throughout Sicily and southern Italy, right? And again, he's winning and winning and winning at first, but can't seal the deal. Eventually, kind of, he starts to lose. Cost gets too high. He's like, forget this, it's too much trouble, goes back to Epirus. A few years later, the most powerful of these Greek cities here in Italy, Tarentum, will surrender to Rome, recognizing Roman authority, and pretty much the rest of the southern Italy will follow quickly, right? So, Rome had some contact with Greece, right? So it's not that this is all kind of brand new. But because of Roman expansion, fighting Pyrrhus and all of this stuff, it's going to get extensive kind of contact with Greek and become intimately involved in kind of Greco-Macedonian affairs. So really, we start looking at Italy and Rome as being part of this larger Hellenistic world, right? From this point on, they are going to be closely enmeshed, culturally, politically, economically, with the larger Hellenistic world. Okay, questions here? Wait, Kieran.
So would this be the official end of ancient Greece?
No, not according to modern historians. Because again, there's Greece, i.e. the Macedonians, are still really powerful, right? So, Macedonian kings are ruling, Greece, Egypt, good chunk of Asia. But we're moving in that direction. All right, so 250 BCE, you can see what the Afro-Eurasian world looks like, right? So we've got Seleucid Empire over here, ruled by the descendants of Alexander's general Seleucus. Ptolemaic kingdom here, right? The Antigoid kingdom of Macedonia up here, the three big power states. Right, we're going to have other smaller kingdoms, such as Epirus over there, right? And as kind of part of this Hellenistic world, right, we've got Rome. And then, as we mentioned earlier in the class, Rome's neighbor / rival to the south, Carthage. Big conflict coming up, Rome versus Carthage. They fight a series of wars that get called the Punic Wars. Punic was the Latin word for Phoenician, right? And as we mentioned, right, Carthage was initially a Phoenician colony. It had won its independence about 650 BCE. As I mentioned, it set up its own republic, its own mixed constitution. And basically Carthage took control of other Phoenician colonies and other territories here in the Western Mediterranean, bringing it under its own authority. So Carthage has its own empire, so to speak. It's a little less of kind of a political empire. We call it kind of more of a maritime commercial empire. By that meaning Carthage is pretty much controlling most of the resources, most of the trade that is going through the Western Mediterranean. Okay? Everyone good with that? All right. So, Carthage, big, powerful, kind of maritime-based commercial empire. Rome is expanding into South Italy. Carthage sees this as a threat, right? It is a danger to Carthaginian interests. 264, there's Messenia, a city-state in Sicily, is being besieged by Carthage. Carthage is trying to kind of conquer it, bringing it under its control. Messenia, at this point, appeals to Rome, saying, hey, Rome, come and help us against Carthage. Rome gladly gets involved. 23 years later, Rome wins Punic War over. First Punic War over. All right, why is the First Punic War important? All right, it's important for several reasons. Number one, this forces Rome to build a navy. As I mentioned, Carthage, maritime-based kind of commercial empire, like the Phoenicians before them, or their ancestor Phoenicians, right? Big on a navy, big on sailing. In order to compete with them, Rome needs its own navy, right? So Rome invests, builds a big, powerful navy that it's going to continue to use. Second thing that happens during the First Punic War is that Rome will seize control of most of Sicily, right? Parts of Sicily down here that had been controlled by Carthage. You can kind of see the green, the western part of Sicily, right? So this is now under Roman control. This is the first territory that Rome controls that's outside of Italy. Okay, so as you mentioned, Rome was managing all of this Italian territory centrally from the city of Rome. Now, however, we get territory that is further away, and apart from that, you got to take a boat, right? You can't even go overland to do it. And so the Romans all right, this is starting to get too big. We need kind of another system, another way to kind of govern this territory. So, here we go. Sicily, or the part that the Romans control, become Rome's first province, right? And this will be followed a little bit after by Sardinia, which is outside of the war. Sardinia is over here, right? Which also gets seized by the Romans. Will be the second province, right? So, they add additional magistrates, 2 more praetors, right, and 2 assistant quaestors, right, who are going to govern these territories, one in Sicily, one in Sardinia, for a year. Hence, governors, right? The governors, like the Persian satraps, right, or the Macedonian satraps, right, are going to hold local power, right, and authority, where they can kind of make more rapid, more on-the-spot decisions in order to manage Roman affairs. We'll talk more about that in a later class. Okay. The other big implication is to kind of compensate for this lost territory up here. The Carthaginian general Hamilcar basically conquers big portions of Spain, right? So Spain, the kind of coastline, had been under kind of Carthaginian control. So after Carthage loses these rich territories, Hamilcar increases kind of Carthaginian control in Spain, a way of kind of making up for the territory and the resources they lost to Rome. Okay? Abdul.
He's part of the reason why the second Punic War happened also.
He is, yeah. So, or at least his son is, right? Who you've probably heard of, right? But yes, and in fact, part of the reason his son is Hannibal, if you've heard of Hannibal, right, which will be in a second, part of the reason that Hannibal is able to do so well is that he's drawing upon the resources that Hamilcar is able to acquire in Spain.
His father hated Rome so much that he taught him to
So goes the story, right? So goes the story. Well, of course you guys all know Hannibal, right? We did the reading. Okay. So that brings us to the Second Punic War, right? So Hannibal, the son of Hamilcar, right? Again, inherits his father's hatred of Rome. He adopts a very kind of aggressive foreign policy towards Rome from kind of his power center in Spain. 218, Rome declares war. All right. The story, right? You know about Hannibal. If you know anything about Hannibal, what do you know about him?
Elephants.
Elephants over the Alps, right? So Hannibal gets the drop on Rome, right? He marches his army, including a couple dozen elephants, over the Alps, over the mountains, which no one believed could be done, and shows up here in northern Italy. Although apparently almost all of the elephants die crossing the Alps, and so he shows up to Italy, I think only with like one left or something like that. So the elephants are less kind of important than the story might make it out to be. Okay, but Hannibal shows up here in Italy, wins all sorts of major victories, right? Right off the bat, Hannibal is kind of putting the Romans to the rout. Big battle here at Cannae, right? Major victory, Hannibal wins, right? A bunch of Italian cities, remember these allies who are under Roman control, who don't really get the good rights and stuff, they rise up in rebellion with Rome, allying with Hannibal. The next year, Carthage, right, forms an alliance with the king of Macedonia, King Philip V, right? So again, king of the Hellenistic kingdom of Macedonia. Over here, right? So they have an alliance against Rome. This technically kicks off what gets called the First Macedonian War, but nothing really happens there. Then, right, we get about a dozen years of fighting in Italy. So Hannibal, kind of like Pyrrhus, is marching around. He's winning victories, but can't quite knock out Rome. All right. So, let us talk about Hannibal. So PS 22. Everyone take a look at 21:4, which is on page 4. So what I'd like you to do is review this paragraph here, 21:4, right? And what does it tell us about the character of Hannibal? So what are his kind of, his good points and bad points, his virtues and his flaws? All right, so what can we say about the character of Hannibal? What type of guy was Hannibal? Briar, what do you have?
He was a man's man.
He was a man's man. All right, what's your evidence for that?
Basically, how he would sleep or rest amongst the comrades in his military cloak. He had no special dignifier that made him visually superior to others.
Mm-hmm.
He was very disciplined. He ate and drank very little. Very little. He was not particularly fussy about temperature, or he was not very sleepy. He was a very disciplined person, and his troops looked up to him.
Okay, so we had a couple of things there, right? The kind of man's thing was that he kind of did what his troops did, right? That he wasn't living a softer life or an easier life than them. What about Anthony? What do you have?
He usually led from the front, so leadership by example. Instead of just being in the back, monitoring what's going on, he actually, guided them towards victory.
Right. And first person on the field, last person to leave, right? All right, what else can we say about him? You on?
That he wasn't perfect. Like despite that, he wasn't perfect. He had vices. He was
Like what?
untrustworthy. I just learned about that word perfidy.
Right.
He was untrustworthy.
Right. So he was untrustworthy,
And he didn't respect the gods. That whole
Right.
line. Perfidy,
impious.
worse than Punic, and utter absence of truthfulness, reverence, fear of the gods, respect for oaths, sense of religion.
Right. Anything?
Despite the hostilities, he actually remained calm. He had a lot of pressure, but he was able to maintain it.
Okay. So calm under pressure, right? But yeah, we get the list of vices on page 5, right? Cruelty, a liar, not respectful of religion or oaths, right? So someone that was, kind of, not really kind of bound by, almost like morality in that way, right? I mean, almost kind of amoral in the sense of like, he was going to treat people cruelly, he wasn't going to tell the truth, he wasn't going to respect oaths, he wasn't going to respect the gods. What about some other? So Briar had mentioned that like he wasn't bothered by heat or cold or something like that, right? This is a really kind of interesting line to look at. So where do we see a quote about him kind of not being bothered by the temperature?
Wait, can you repeat the question?
Where do we see a quote saying that he's not really bothered by the temperature? In the quote. Abdul, do you have it?
Said he was equally indifferent to heat and cold.
Yeah, right. So he was indifferent to heat and cold. So what does that mean? What does that mean?
I think maybe he was more so like unfeeling rather than like a survivalist.
Yeah, right? Okay, that's a good way of putting it. Like somehow it didn't infect him or he didn't feel it, rather than he kind of adapted to it or went through it, right? And this difference is going to be important. Kieran, did you have something?
No.
You looked there, raising your hand, right? And you see it kind of with the other stuff too, right? So that his eating and drinking were measured by the needs of nature, not by appetite, right? He ate, just enough to fuel his body, but not, because he was starving or hungry or wanted to, right? Or his hours of sleep weren't determined by day or night, right? But whatever time was left over. And so it's kind of telling you something maybe about him as a human or as a machine, right? Like, how would you characterize him based on this description?
Machine, basically.
Okay, well, all right.
Determined individual.
All right, like determined machine, right?
I think like inexorable would be a good word, especially because of like the no amount of exertion causing either bodily or mental fatigue.
Right.
Like he's kind of unstoppable a little bit.
A Terminator,
Yeah.
Briar.
Kind of like the epitome of masculinity, very resilient, almost like Hercules.
Okay, so there you go, right? That what the way he's being described is it's really, Livy, who's a Roman author, is, whether this is true or not, maybe not, right? But he's drawing on what are kind of prototypical Roman standards of masculinity here, right? And again, it's this distinction between not just kind of forcing yourself to deal with something, but almost not being affected by it at all, is seen as kind of the standard, right? And then, who was the one who asked about Kieran asked about the Pan-Hellenic character, right? Or if we see something from Italians. And so we're going to see kind of a Roman character being cultivated, right? This idea of what makes the Romans better than other peoples of the world, right? And they're going to use this later on to kind of legitimize their own empire and their own rule, right? And to kind of this type of description, this description of what a Roman man was, and the strengths of a Roman man that we see here being applied to Hannibal are going to be kind of front and center in that discussion, right? That Romans ruled because they were, I mean, this is going to sound very eugenic, right? But I mean, kind of the direction the Romans were going, like a superior type of man, a superior type of human, right? Is going to be kind of part of their rhetoric, right? Now, what's going to be interesting to kind of give away the end of the story, right, is that Rome becomes, well, already is to a certain extent, but becomes increasingly, you would say, kind of diverse, and who constitutes being a Roman is going to get wider and wider and wider and wider. If you remember all the way back to day one, right, when I was showing the Egyptian kind of mummy portraits, right? So who's considered a Roman, this kind of superior man, is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger over time, right? So it's going to, in some ways, it's going to be less tied to biology and more tied to one's culture.
Was that because, I guess, Rome got so big?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of the natural way of things, right? That your view of kind of who's in and who's out changes over time and changes with generations, right? And you remember, right, the last thing, who was it that said, oh yeah, one of the big reasons for Rome's victory, why Rome became preeminent power, is because they had this kind of special character. That the Roman men were somehow better than other men. What's that? Not so much with Romulus, or at least that comes to mind, but something we looked at recently.
Polybius?
Polybius, right? And remember we looked at the story of Horatius Cocles, which kind of exemplified that. He's like, one of the reasons why Romans came, right, is again, they kind of cultivated this superior virtue. That Romans were better men, but again, it wasn't biology, right? It was just kind of the nature of being Roman. All right, last thing, right? We've got, or last thing for Livy here. We've got 2117. He talks about the Roman army fighting against the Carthaginians, right? So scan down this really fast. What do you notice about the composition of the Roman army? What do you notice, Anthony?
Large cavalry.
All right, large cavalry. Cavalry's a part of the Roman army, absolutely, right? In theory, this is where the equites kind of got their initial prestige, right? The highest level of the Roman highest wealth class. What else do we see?
Large infantry as well, and we're a fleet of like 220 ships.
Okay, so we've got some infantry, we've got some cavalry, we got the ships. Again, First Punic War. Abdul?
The Allies contributed more.
Right. So notice how Livy breaks this down. We had Roman infantry, which is going to consist of Roman citizens and Latin citizens, and then the Allied infantry and cavalry and stuff, right, that the Italian allies were contributing to, right? And the Italian allies are contributing more than the Romans. And what did we learn about the Italian allies and their kind of legal rights?
They don't have them.
They're, or at least very limited compared to Romans, right? Good observation. All right, so remember that next week. We will come back to this. All right, other questions right now? Angie?
I was going to say naval fleet.
Yeah, and then naval, right? So we've got infantry, cavalry, naval fleet, right? Again, remember, Navy comes out of the First Punic War. All right, so moving forward, Hannibal's marching around, can't quite knock out Rome, but the Romans can't get rid of him. This brings us to Publius Cornelius Scipio, who later gets the kind of surname Africanus, right? Africanus, he's like, comes up with a young man, comes up with a new strategy. He's like, let's not fight the Carthaginians in Italy, this is when Hannibal's marching around. Let's head over to Spain. Remember, this is kind of his power base, where a lot of his resources are coming from, and take out his kind of supply and his power base. Abdul.
Wasn't he like his father consul also that fought at the Battle of Cannae, right? When he lost, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Father
Yes,
was
yes,
consul.
yes, yeah. His father was one of the losers there.
Yeah.
Yep. So, sails over to Italy, Spain, right? And is actually able to expel the Carthaginian forces from Spain, right? Hannibal, still up here marching around Italy, trying to knock out Rome. At which point, again, Scipio ignores Italy, sails to North Africa, threatens Carthage, right? Carthage is right there. Carthaginian government recalls Hannibal. Hannibal has to leave Italy to sail back to defend Carthage from Hannibal. Outside of Hannibal, or actually outside of Carthage, down here at Zama, there's going to be a big battle. Scipio wins. Second Punic War is going to be over. So, if you remember, right, there was this alliance formed between Carthage and King Philip V of Macedonia. Technically, we get the First Macedonian War, but really nothing happened. Like, Philip doesn't really contribute much. Not much fighting goes on between him and Rome. It's just kind of there. But now that the Second Roman Punic War is done, right, Rome starts looking at Philip, this guy that, you know, made an alliance with the Carthaginians and fought against us. So, allegedly, we don't know if this is true or not, Philip allies with the Seleucid king Antiochus III to defend against Rome, or perhaps this is the pretext, but Rome invades Macedonia. This is the Second Macedonian War. Rome wins, and as part of the settlement, the Kingdom of Macedonia has to remove all of the troops from Greece proper. So if you remember, right, Greece had pretty much been under Macedonian control, right? Some parts more than others for a long period of time. Rome forces Macedonia again to remove the troops and ensure the freedom of the Greeks. Once again, the Greeks are free, and thanks to Rome. So, about 20 years later, 25 years later, right, we get the Third War. Rome's going to fight against Perseus, who's the son of Philip V. Right, Rome wins. This is the end of the Macedonian monarchy. Right, after this defeat, the Kingdom of Macedonia is no more. It's broken up into a bunch of smaller states. This is also when one of Macedonia's allies, the Achaean League, if you remember, who had been freed from the Macedonians a little bit earlier, right? They're going to be defeated. 1,000 hostages have to be sent to Rome, and this includes our friend Polybius. So, no more Kingdom of Macedonia. Some smaller kind of mini kingdoms. All right. 148, Rome decides, all right, just forget about this kind of smaller mini kingdoms, still too much trouble. It annexes Macedonia outright. Makes Macedonia its first eastern province under direct Roman control with an appointed governor. The annexation of Macedonia then leads to uprisings throughout all of Greece, right? Seeing the threat that Rome presents, right? As a result of these uprisings, Rome annexes all of Greece, right? So bringing all of Greece under Roman control. So much for the freedom of the Greeks, right? Now that, go ahead.
I'm curious, were there any like Athenian or like Spartan separatists who wanted to
Who wanted to what?
I guess leave the control of Rome and be their own?
Oh yeah, I mean initially they fought against Rome.
Yeah. Like later on.
We don't hear much of it later on. Like Rome is clearly in charge. And to be honest, I mean most people are kind of okay with Rome. From what we can tell, most people seem pretty okay in Greece, seem pretty okay with Rome being in charge. All right? And partly perhaps because of this, right? Taking control of Greece brings Rome even closer to the Hellenistic world, right? All sorts of benefits are going to come from this, right? That basically taking control of Greece Romans are going to adopt Greek literary culture, Greek kind of artistic culture, elements of kind of Greek economics and trade, right? So Rome is going to start to flourish, not just militarily, but culturally, after absorbing Greece. And a later poet by the name of Horace wrote kind of a famous poetic line, Graecia capta ferum victorum cepit, or Greece, having been taken captive, took captive its savage victor. What do you think Horace means by that? Yeah, Jordan.
Romans moved into Greece and became Hellenized.
Yeah, pretty much it, right? That Rome conquered Greece, but kind of Greece won because the Romans kind of became Hellenized, or even more Hellenized. All right. So, brings us to a Roman Empire. We get a third Punic War. Going to be a short-lived war. This is going to lead with the destruction of Carthage. So a famous Roman statesman at the time, Marcus Porcius Cato, right, says, look, right, we keep defeating Carthage. Carthage keeps causing us trouble in the future. It's time to eliminate them. So at the end of the Third Punic War, the city of Carthage is supposedly razed to the ground, and then the ground is salted so that nothing can grow there again. Although that's relatively temporary. Stuff will grow there again later, if that's true. This creates, in North Africa then, a new Roman province, Africa province, again to be ruled by a Roman governor. So over the next 100 years, right, so 146 to 46, right, Rome is going to continue expanding, acquiring territory through Asia Minor and the Middle East, right? So you can see here by 44 BCE, Rome is going to control, not just Italy, not just Greece and Spain, Gaul, modern France, North Africa, Egypt, big chunks of the Middle East, right? All of this is under Roman control. We talk about there being a Roman Empire, right? So the Roman Republic is still in charge. We still got our consuls, our Senate, our assembly of people, right? So it's still a republic, and yet it is in charge of, again, a wide-spanning Mediterranean empire. All right, questions, comments, thoughts? No? Okay. So that is what I've got for today. So we're done here. If there's anything else I could help with, I am available and happy to help. Otherwise, everyone have a great rest of your day. Remember, if you want to turn in a complete draft or a complete rough draft for SA2, the deadline's Saturday.